Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's get started and look into the first article. The first article says Chinese cyber attack foiled, says Power Ministry. Another relevant article, it says Chinese may have targeted power systems, ports, says US firm. Both these articles are speaking about the cyber threat that is emanating from China. Let's try and understand what are these cyber attacks all about. We have the Union Power Ministry, which has recently said that state-sponsored Chinese hackers wanted to target the Indian power sector, but they were not successful. They were not able to implicate any damages to the power sector. That is because the Indian agencies had prior information about this particular attack. Then we have an important firm from United States of America called as Recorded Future. This happens to be a cybersecurity company. What does this company do? This basically collects information about the cyber security threats that are happening in different countries. It analyzes these threats and it ensures that it also disseminates this information about the cyber security threat to number of countries as well as United States of America. So this happens to be a firm which is into the cyber security. According to this particular firm, we had a major outrage in Mumbai when it comes to the power in 2020 October. According to this particular firm, it has gone ahead and said that it might be because of the coordinated cyber attack by China. So what are we looking at? We are looking at cyber attack which has been initiated by China, which emanated from China as it was a state-sponsored attack from China, says one, the United States of America's firm, the other is the Power Ministry. What exactly are the details as given by this particular firm? We have Responded Future, which has gone ahead and said there was deadly clash that was taking place between India and China along the line of actual control. This started in the month of April and May it started increasing as well. During this particular period, we have the state-sponsored hackers from China who wanted to increase the malware targeting, where when it comes to the government offices, when it comes to the important defense organizations and the public sector as well. So what was happening? Because there was skirmishes along the line of actual control between China and India, they also wanted to ensure that there was malware attack on the government organizations, defense organizations, public sector sectors, says this particular firm. Meanwhile, they also said that these attackers used what is called as the shadowpad malware. So this particular shadowpad malware was used by an organization or a hacking group called as Red Hiko. What is this malware? Malware is nothing but malicious software. So how does it work? Let's say, for example, there is a virus that is sent, or it can be a worm, or it can be a Trojan as well. So this can be sent via the mail, this can be sent via a software, or they can use multiple other sources to export this particular virus, worm, or a Trojan. The minute this is downloaded, the minute this is clicked, there is a virus or a Trojan activation which might want to make sure that a particular activity is immediately destroyed or a particular activity is not conducted. Through this particular group called as Red Eco, they were able to ensure that the malware shadowpad was sent to major organizations in India. Apart from this particular malware, they were constantly monitoring the government organizations and they infused PlugX malware C2 infrastructure malware, through which they were able to target multiple Indian government sectors, public sector and defense organizations as well. These are the details which are given by the United States of America's firm, and as a result, the government has responded that there was no impact on any of the functionalities carried out at the Power Sector Operations Corporation. In fact, the government has also confirmed that there was no data breach, data loss, and they had no issues when it comes to the operation. This was what was said by the Power Ministry. In this particular backdrop, we have to understand what are the policy guidelines when it comes to cyber attacks initiated by China. There are three major organizations when it comes to China. One is what is called as China's Ministry of State Security. What is this China's Military of State Security? This is nothing but China's external intelligence agency. Just like we have RAW, they have what is called as Ministry of State Security. Then we have Ministry of Public Security. This happens to be primarily responsible for the intelligence intelligence activities within the boundaries of China. Just like we have IB, what they have is the Ministry of Public Security. And finally, we have the People's Liberation Army. So it is People's Liberation Army, which is the Chinese military organization, but it also conducts most of the country's cyber espionage activities. So remember, the cyber espionage activities in most of the cases is conducted by the People's Liberation Army. Why are we discussing this? That is because when we go back to the year 1991, what we had is the Gulf War, which was taken up by the United States of America. Apart from the conventional war, which United States of America was involved in, which was use of military, which was use of air force and use of navy, China also figured out that United States of America was also involved in what is called as the cyber warfare or cyber attack. This is when it realized that it has to come up with an approach similar to that of United States of America. So what do? They analyze the information technology systems and they understood that if they have to advance in terms of defense, it is not only military, not only navy or air force. What they have to advance is in the domain of cyber security and cyber attacks. So the principle was taken, and that is how they were able to implement this cyber attack policy as one of the guidelines when it comes to their defense operations. Apart from this policy of cyber attack, they also had what is called as the hybrid warfare. What is this hybrid warfare? This is use of non-military tools, basically to achieve dominance or damage or subvert the influence of another country. How? By using information pollution. So what do? They flood a particular country with all types of propaganda, all types of perception management, and flood another country with the propaganda or false lie with respect to an information flooding. So this particular hybrid warfare also became an aspect as to how China would conduct its military operations. So it is not only about army, it is not only about navy or air force, but it included cyber attack as the policy and also hybrid warfare, which was about informational propaganda. This is the background with respect to how China operates when it comes to its military and the military guidelines. Why are we discussing this? That is because we have to know how India or any other country in the near future has to respond to China because of cyber attacks that are emanating from China. The first important factor that we have to consider is to create financial incentives for the cyber security. What do we mean by it? When it comes to India, we boast ourselves as one of the country which is growing when it comes to the IT sector. We also boast about our country where maximum number of engineers come every year, and we also boast about our country because we export IT to the world as well. We also have Indian diaspora who are working in United States of America in number of IT firms and also in NASA as well. But where are we lagging? We are lagging when it comes to the cyber security. When you look into the United States of America, they have both offensive as well as the defensive strategy when it comes to the cyber security and cyber attack. What is this defensive strategy? They are able to have a clear-cut plan when it comes to how they can stop a particular attack. This is what is defensive strategy, and at the same time, in case there is a country which is planning to attack, they also have the offensive strategy as well. Similarly, when it comes to China, they also have offensive strategy and the defensive strategy. When you look into the statistics as given by number of newspaper and outlets, China has an army of cyber experts. China has an army which conducts these offensive strategies as well. But when it comes to India, the numbers are completely outdated. The numbers are comparatively weaker, says this article. So what are we supposed to do? We have to create incentives for the private cyber security firms. Let's say, for example, if the government is not able to keep up and keep a check on the critical infrastructure in India, we have to ensure that the government starts pumping in more amount of money into the private security. So give out this particular company, give out this particular critical infrastructure outlet to one of the private cyber security, pump in more money so that they take care of this particular infrastructure. In case there is any violation, that private cybersecurity will be held accountable by the government. If they are able to do so, the number of threats emanating from different countries can be comparatively minimized. If the government is able to do it, fair enough. If the government is not able to do, we have to attract the Indian diaspora who are working in some other country, and at the same time make sure that we pay as much as possible to the Indian youth who are working in the cybersecurity domain, or engage a private cybersecurity company so that there is no leakage of the information. The second suggestion is establishing multi-nation cyber coalition. How exactly does it work? China has issues not only with India but also with multiple other countries in Asia. Let's say for example, it has issues with Japan, it has issues with Vietnam, and it also has issues with Australia as well, where cyber attacks were also initiated against the Australian organizations. So what should we do? Just like we have the maritime exercise where the Quad countries all come together, or we have number of countries which come together against the maritime expansion of China. So what we require is a coalition against the cyber attack as well. So all those countries where China has initiated or China has problems with those countries, these countries like Japan, Vietnam and Australia and multiple other countries will have to come on a common platform, engage in the cyber policy, which is where in case there is threat emanating from China, they have to discuss how this can be superseded or it can be destroyed. So what are we supposed to do? We have to have a collective cyber capabilities and knowledge to better identify and respond to the cyber attacks emanating from China. The third suggestion is in reference to the equipments. What is happening in India? Let's say for example, when it comes to the manufacturing of phones, we do not have our own phones. When we speak about the Chinese phones, we have n number of them in the market. Or let's say for example, we are speaking about the routers. Or let's say for example, we are speaking about processors. India does not have the processors, the routers, or in fact number of phones of its own. So what should the government of India do? It should start investing in all these sectors. Apart from this, it should also give incentives to the private sectors which are based in India so that they can develop equipments for India. So the real Atmanirbhar Bharat when it comes to the equipments and its manufacturing will have to take place in India is the third important recommendation. Finally, we have to initiate what is called as the offensive strategy. As of now, yes, the government of India will have what is called as the offensive strategy. It is good that it is not in the public forum, or else me and you would know about it, which the other countries should not know. But one of the offensive action that we are all aware of is that recently India had sponsored one of the groups called as Sidewinder, which had targeted Chinese military and government entities in 2020, says some of the newspaper outlet. So similarly, the government in the near future should also have an offensive policy when it comes to China. It is not only about China, it can be with respect to Pakistan as well. So we should have what is called as the defensive policy and offensive policy as well. Restraint, when it is practiced for too long, can also encourage the enemy to simply continue with more attacks, and as a result this will undermine the national security. This will dismantle the critical infrastructure when it comes to India. So what we require is also an offensive strategy and a policy when it comes to the cyber security domain. It is this that we have to understand in reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article here is speaking about the master of the roster issue and the collegium system, and how the author says that the collegium system has failed when it comes to its execution. First up, we have to understand what is this master of the roster. When it comes to the Supreme Court of India, or let's say for example any of the high courts, we have the Chief Justice of India when it comes to the Supreme Court. We also have the Chief Justice when it comes to the high courts as well. So it is the Chief Justice of India who as an administrative head also allocates cases to the respective benches. Let's say for example there is a public interest litigation, or let's say for example there is conflict in a company, or let's say for example there are issues with respect to the fundamental rights. Which case will go to a different bench, which case will be allocated to that particular judge, will be decided by the Chief Justice of India. So similarly, when it comes to the High Court, it is the Chief Justice of the respective High Court who will also act as the master of the roster. So what is this master of the roster? It is one of the administrative powers which is given to the Chief Justice of India, where he has the power to allocate cases to a specific bench or to a specific judge, so that he listens to that particular case and gives his judgment after hearing of all the arguments. Now when it comes to the master of the roster, the article here pictures that there are issues and so much of unbridled powers should not be given to the master of the roster, which happens to be the Chief Justice of India. What are the concerns here? The article takes into picture the Chief Justice of India, Gogoi, who instituted suo motu proceedings despite being an accused. What are we speaking about? There was one of the charges of sexual allegation against Chief Justice of India. This is where we have to refer one of the principles of natural justice. What does natural justice principle say? Any person cannot be a judge in his own cause. So in this particular case, who was the master of the roster? It is the Chief Justice of India. Who was the allegation against? It was against the Chief Justice of India. So why did he take up this particular proceeding on a suo motu proceedings and asked which bench he has to allocate on? Ideally, what is happening here? It is violating the natural justice principle. Yes, we all know for the fact that the Chief Justice of India is the master of the roster, but when he is the one who is accused of a particular crime, of committing a crime, which is an allegation, that is when this particular responsibility should have ideally gone to someone else, and it was not to be given to the Chief Justice of India. And now, in the present context, we have the judgment made by the Supreme Court of India, where they have said that this particular allegation against the Chief Justice of India was not right, and they have struck down this particular case as well. So what are we looking at? We are looking at violation of the natural justice principle when it comes to the Chief Justice of India on the first condition. The second condition that we have to look at is when it comes to the executive and judiciary. They should not interfere with each other. There should be complete compartmentalization or separation of powers. But what is happening when it comes to India's judiciary and this unbridled power that is given to the Chief Justice of India? When it comes to the judiciary, it is said that it is not the judiciary as a whole which provides the judgments or a particular judgment, but it is the bench that is constituted. Let me give you an example. Let's say, for example, there is a particular judge A, or let's say there is a particular judge B. If these two judges are present in one of the Supreme Court cases, they might give a particular verdict. Or let's say there is a particular judge C or a particular judge D, they might give a different interpretation, take a different interpretation, and the judgment might be different as well. So it depends on who the judge is when it comes to the cases. This is where the author says that there's controversy when it comes to executive interfering with the judiciary. How? Let's say, for example, when it comes to the executive and the judiciary, there is complete separation of powers. But what if the Chief Justice of India is close to the executive? So with the help of this Chief Justice of India, who is the master of the roster, they are able to put only those judges who are in favor of the executive or in favor of the government, such that all the cases go in favor of the executive. So directly there is no interference by the executive in reference to the judiciary, but because the Chief Justice of India has a direct connection with the executive, which is where the author says in this particular case, in case the master of the roster is in favor of the government, that is when this whole process of separation may get nullified, says the author. This is where he also brings into consideration one of the statements made by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar ji. He says that after all, the Chief Justice is a man with all the failings, all the sentiments and all the prejudices as we the common people have. Just like how the common people have their own prejudices, have their own perceptions, have their own opinions, there can be a perception of the Chief Justice of India of his own which might hinder the complete separation of powers, says this article. When we look into the Supreme Court judgments in Ashok Pandey versus the Supreme Court of India, a 3-judge bench of the court held that master of the roster is the Chief Justice exclusive power. Then there was another other two judge bench in Shanti Bhushan versus the Supreme Court of India, which rejected the plea that the master of the roster should be interpreted as collegium. So this meant that the entire power is focused only with respect to the Chief Justice of India and not with the other Supreme Court judges, the senior most judges, as we have in the collegium. And as a result, this is where the author says derives some of the problems. What are these problems? Let's say, for example, we have the Chief Justice of India who is in favor of the executive or he is in favor of the government. So what would happen? He may favor a particular bench, and that particular bench may give judgments in favor of the executive or the government, which means justice will not be delivered, says the author. When such a Chief Justice of India is close by to the executive, as in the case of Justice Gogoi, he says it can land up in the post-retirement job as well. How? In the case of Justice Gogoi, he also became a member of Rajya Sabha. So what does the author say? He says that such post-retirement job, lure for the post-retirement job and attraction towards the post-retirement job means that this particular process of separation of powers may not work efficiently and there is interference of the executive with the judiciary, says the first criticism. Apart from this, the privilege of master of the roster shows that the CJI's allocation of cases is an unchecked power. So he can allocate that particular case to anyone whom he wants, and ultimately that particular judgment may go in favor of the executive. So what does the author suggest? So looking into all these arguments, the author in this particular case suggests that when it comes to the post-retirement jobs, there has to be a cooling off period. What is this cooling off period? Let's say, for example, there is a particular period during which this particular Chief Justice or judge who happens to be the Chief Justice should not be given any job role under the executive or under the legislature. Let's say, for example, that particular Chief Justice becoming the governor, like in the state of Kerala, or for example becoming a Rajya Sabha member, or for example taking any of the executive designations, there should be a cooling off period. So that cooling off period can be 2 years or it can be 3 years. Such initiative have to be taken so that the executive is not attracting the Chief Justice or the relevant judges. And at the same time, currently when we are looking into the Chief Justice, he has unbridled powers. So what should we do? We should have what is called as the Chief Justice of India and some of the senior most judges who should also be part of this particular process. So this power entirely should not be given to the Chief Justice of India. Instead, we require about 3 to 4 senior judges who should also be part when it comes to the allocation of cases. So the article suggests only when we are able to step in and make these changes, that is when we can have a check on the executive and the separation of powers when it comes to the judiciary, says this article. It is this that we have to understand in reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says cold comfort. This is about the grey list. This is about Pakistan as well. This is about the FATF. What are we discussing here? We have the Financial Task Force which has decided once again to keep Pakistan on the grey list of countries under increased monitoring. When we go back to the year 2015, Pakistan was removed from the Financial Action Task Force grey list, and again in the year 2018 it was again put in the grey list and it was given certain terms and conditions and action plan so that they had to fulfill all these criterias so that they are removed from the grey list. What is the present condition? According to the Financial Action Task Force, they have gone ahead and said, yes, Pakistan has demonstrated that there are few things which it has met up to, but there are 2 to 3 obligations which Pakistan has failed, which it has not fulfilled according to the action plan. What are these? One is in demonstrating terror funding prosecution in accurate, effective and dissuasive way. So when it comes to Pakistan, there was terror funding that was happening with respect to certain organizations. These organizations and individuals should have to be culpable, should have to be put behind bars, and they have to freeze the assets of those organizations and individuals. But in the present scenario, Financial Action Task Force has said that terror financing prosecution, that is putting them behind the bars has not taken place completely. How? The Financial Action Task Force takes the example of UN Security Council designated Hafiz Saeed, JEM Chief Masood Azhar, other leaders of terror groups in Pakistan, and those belonging to Al Qaeda. They're still not sanctioned, they're still not put behind bars, their assets are still not froze, says the Financial Action Task Force. It is because they were not able to take all these action plans, they're still being monitored under the grey list, says this article. Now, an important question: what happens when a particular country is in this grey list? Let's say, for example, we take the Pakistan. Let's say Pakistan as a country is placed in grey list. What would happen? Its image in the global country will also come under threat. Every country will start seeing Pakistan as a terrorist country, where Pakistan is a country which is breeding terrorism grounds and it is also exporting to its neighboring countries. So what would suffer? Its international reputation would suffer, its image would also suffer, and countries as a whole would not want to make any business with Pakistan. So as a result, the cost of doing business in Pakistan over a period of time increases as well. Apart from this, let's say for example, if Pakistan wants money from the IMF or from the World Bank, or it can be from any of the international organizations as well. These organizations will be hesitant to give money to Pakistan. Why? Because they fear that this money given for the developmental purpose or for any of the economic advantages in that particular country might be rooted to some other cause or supporting the cause of terrorism. And as a result, international organizations like World Bank or the Asian Development Bank may not be ready to give money to this particular country, and as a result this particular country as a whole suffers. So the image and reputation is under threat, they would not be able to conduct their business activities, and as a result what they will also have is the problem when it comes to getting the funds from the international organizations. So what is the major problem right now? The major problem would be their macroeconomic stability would come under threat. So which is why the country will go into deep economic crisis, which can be a major problem for that particular country. So going forward, Pakistan will have to make sure that all its objectives and action plans are implemented, and it has to ensure it freezes the assets when it comes to these organizations. It is this that we have to understand in reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article here is speaking about relationship between United States of America and Iran. When it comes to the relationship and about the Iran nuclear deal, we have discussed in this very platform about number of issues that may surface between United States of America as well as Iran. So we would not be taking up this article, but this article here makes a mention of what is called as INSTEX. What is this INSTEX? This is one of the trade mechanism to continue trade with Iran in a non-dollar basis. What exactly happened? Back in 2018, the Trump administration from United States of America had enforced a lot of sanctions on Iran, which is where they were not able to deal on a dollar basis, which is where majority of the countries were not able to have any of the economic transactions with Iran. That is where we have three important countries called as E3. What are these E3 countries? We have Germany, France and UK, and they came up with a proposal called as INSTEX, which stands for Instrument in Support of Trade Exchanges. So this is a mission to facilitate in non-USD transactions and non-SWIFT to avoid breaking US sanctions. The European signatories of this particular JCPOA or the Iran nuclear deal created such a system. What was this INSTEX all about? It covers only humanitarian goods such as medicine, water and food supplies which are not affected by sanctions anyway. However, what are the concerns with respect to INSTEX? When we look into the INSTEX, all these transactions were basically restricted only to the medicine, water and food supplies, but trading in oil was not taking place, and this meant that Iran was not able to grow when it comes to its economy. Iranian economy is basically based on oil, but oil was not covered under the INSTEX, and at the same time the process was initiated, but by the time the action was executed there was an undue delay, and as a result the economic advantage were not able to be reaped by Iran, says this article. Only this is what we have to understand, but the rest of the analysis we have already taken care. So until and unless there is massive drastic change. You don't have to go through this Iran and United States of America's deal. Now let's look into the mains practice questions. Discuss the various threats emanating from China in the cyber domain with relevant examples. What should be India's response to China's cyber attacks? Next question. Collegium system has been ineffective in maintaining the judiciary's independence from the government. Critically examine. So please write all your answers on the comment section. Peer review. Give positive feedback to your friends' answers. So this is it for today. Thank you for watching. All the best.